Good afternoon and welcome to the first session in the This Lead is Killing Us web series hosted by the Martingale Press Health Professions Division Library at Nova Southeastern University. A few housekeeping things before we begin. First, the session is being recorded and it will be posted on our website, which I will share in just a moment. During the presentation, please make sure to remain muted. And there will be time at the end for questions. Feel free to enter your questions into the chat box as you think of them, and we will get to as many as possible during the Q&A session. This web series is based on the National Library of Medicine digital exhibit, This Lead is Killing Us, a history of citizens fighting lead poisoning in their communities. Guest curated by Dr. Richard Mizell from the University of Houston. The exhibit explores how citizens have confronted lead industries, housing authorities, and elected officials to protect their health against the dangers of lead poisoning. The goal of this companion web series is to raise awareness about lead poisoning and empower our communities to advocate for healthier places to live, learn, and work. We have created a website with a link to the free online exhibit, list of virtual events, and resources. You can access the website by visiting lib.nova.edu/lead. In virtual events, you will find information for all the events in our web series, such as date, time, description, and link to register or join. We'll be adding 2 more events, so please check the page often for any updates. On this page, you will also find the link to the recordings. And in the resources page, you will find information on lead poisoning, environmental health topics, and environmental justice. We're excited to welcome today's speaker, Daryl Garsik, Environmental Health and Safety Specialist at Nova Southeastern University. She is a registered environmental specialist with a Master of Public Health from the University of Miami. Previously a licensed healthcare risk manager, she has extensive experience conducting elevated blood lead level investigations. She has 30 years of experience working for the state of Florida in both the Florida Department of Health and Florida Department of Transportation. She has promoted employee and laboratory safety, participated in a variety of infectious disease outbreaks and chemical spill responses, and enforced many environmental health regulations, including those related to schools, child care centers, food services, swimming pools, and on-site sewage treatment disposal systems. So now I will pass it over to Daryl. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. And I'm going to be sharing with you some information that's from the Environmental Protection Agency, and it's basic information about lead and in the drinking water. Both the EPA and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention agree that there's no safe level of lead in a child's blood. And we do need to take action to reduce these exposures so that we can improve outcomes for children, especially for children. I am going to talk about the health effects of being exposed to lead in drinking water in all ages. Also talk about how lead gets into the drinking water, and then just briefly address the concern of showering in lead contaminated drinking water. But all the information that I'm going to talk about, you can get on the EPA website. I probably will also expand on some of this because I do have some personal experience dealing with lead as in my background. And first thing I'm going to talk about is how lead gets into drinking water. And basically it comes from the plumbing materials that may contain some lead. Those corrode and get into the drinking water. And the reason they can corrode is that possibly the water has a high acidity, which causes it to corrode the pipe. Also, it may be that there's a low mineral content in the water. So we know that if there's low mineral content in the water, then the minerals can actually diffuse into the water. And so basically that's the main concern. And the source is from the plumbing itself. There are also lead service lines that were installed historically prior to 1986, and the service line that is connected to the home may be a lead line. Some of the faucets that you may want to look at as far as having lead in them would be ones that are brass or chrome-plated brass faucets. And then also plumbing itself has historically had lead solder. So that's a concern as well, and another source for lead. In the United States, we have the Safe Drinking Water Act, and that has gone through several revisions. The latest one was September 1st, 2020, so that's fairly recently. So this has been evolving over the years. And the final regulation that in 2020 was the use of lead-free pipes, fittings, fixtures, solder, and flux for drinking water. And the act now prohibits the use of any pipe or plumbing fitting or fixture, any solder or any flux after 1986, and the installation, repair, or of any public water system, any plumbing in a residential or non-residential facility providing water for human consumption that is not lead-free. So it goes on to basically define what is considered to be lead-free. And it won't allow any the pipe plumbing fitting or fixture or solder or flux that is not lead-free to go into commerce. So that's important, so that in the United States, these can't be purchased to be installed after this time. It also provided a methodology for calculating whether and determining whether fixtures can be labeled as lead-free. Okay. The Safe Drinking Water Act was first passed in 1974, and I'm going to go over kind of how it evolved. So the first step was to require the EPA to determine the level of contaminants in drinking water at which no adverse health effects are likely to occur with an adequate margin of safety. So that was what they first looked at, making these standards health-based. And that is a non-enforceable health goal based solely on the possible health risks that are called maximum contaminant level goals. And it's important to know the difference between that, because for lead, the maximum contaminant level goal is 0. There is no safe level of exposure to lead in drinking water. The enforceable levels are the maximum contaminant levels, and those are set as close to the health goals as possible, but those also consider the cost, benefit, and ability of the water system to detect and remove the contaminants using the suitable treatment technologies. So there's a big difference between what is considered to be safe as in terms of health and what is the level that was initially used by this regulation. Because lead contamination of drinking water often results from corrosion of plumbing materials belonging to the water system customers, that's problematic because it's not necessarily the system itself. It may be parts of the home that are corroding. And that was one of the reasons that it was justified that they would use a treatment technique rather than the MCL for lead. So, and that was initially. And that happened in 1991. And then the lead and copper rule itself was first implemented in 1991. It was revised again in 2004 and then in 2007. And this was the rule that required water treatment as being the way to prevent lead from entering the drinking water from the different fixtures and solders and components of the water system, the drinking water system. So this is where they looked at corrosivity. And I do recall this, that was about the time that I was doing the elevated blood lead level investigations, and at that time it was thought that controlling the corrosivity of the water would be enough to keep lead from contaminating the water. And it tended to, at that time, not be that drinking water would be a major area for looking for a lead poisoning in a child. The rule itself requires the system to collect tap samples from sites served by the system that are more likely to have plumbing materials containing lead. And then if 10% of the tap water samples exceed the lead action level of 15 parts per billion, then the water system is required to take certain actions, including using a corrosion control treatment. They needed to educate the public about lead in drinking water and replace the portions of lead service lines. So at that time in 1991, this monitoring started where the municipality and water system would need to start sampling for lead and working toward corrosion control if that was found to be necessary. There's also additional EPA and other standards for drinking water. All the community water systems are required to prepare and deliver an annual water quality report called the Consumer Confidence Report for their customers. And that's something interesting. You can look that up for for your home or business. I know I went ahead and looked for Davie because the NSU, the main campus, is located in Davie. And it's there, and it's very interesting because you can see where they may have had samples that did have some lead. Where lead may have been detected, it lets you kind of know whether, oh, is this just not a problem at all, or is it an issue in your community? So that's wonderful that we're able to access that. Anybody can on a municipal water system. Also, EPA has a public notification rule, which requires a public water system to alert you if there's a particular problem with your drinking water. The EPA action level in drinking water is more than 15 parts per billion lead and greater than 10% of the drinking water system's tap water samples. So basically, that's the level. And like I said before, there really isn't a safe level, but that has been set at 15. And at that point, if they're getting that, then they have to take action. Like I said, so look at the corrosion treatment basically. And then also maybe removing different lead lines or equipment. Also interesting to note that the American Academy of Pediatrics also has a standard, and that is not to exceed 1 part per billion lead in the drinking water. So that's something that has been, this does make a big difference, and the EPA is looking at revising the standard at this time. So I do expect this to evolve even more. Now that we have this standard, it's very important. It's these standards that are put out by professionals that are treating children. Okay, so let's get into the health effects of exposure to lead in drinking water. And lead is a toxic metal that can be harmful to human health, even at low exposure levels. Lead is persistent. It can bioaccumulate in the body over time. And this is very important because the tests that are used are blood tests. And at any given time, you could have lead accumulated in other organs in your body, especially in the bones. Sometimes lead studies will be done on teeth. So when you do get exposed to lead, it's not necessarily going to be in your blood. Your body removes it from your blood and puts it in other organs and bone in particularly. The drinking water can make up 20% or more of a person's total exposure to lead. And then young children, infants, and fetuses are particularly vulnerable to lead because of the physical and behavioral effects of lead that occur at lower exposure levels in children than in adults. Low levels of exposure in children have been linked to damage of the central and peripheral nervous system, learning disabilities, shorter stature, impaired hearing, and impaired formation and function of blood cells. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention recommend that public health actions be initiated when the level of lead in a children's blood is 10 micrograms per deciliter or more. And I kind of remember we were looking at 10 in the past. And if it was very high, there's a chelation that may be done with a child. They would not do a chelation therapy unless it was very high, because of what I talked about before, that if you use chelation, it could actually drive the lead out of the bones or anywhere where that had deposited in the body. You don't want to get it in the blood, because then there's going to be exposure to the neurological system and it can cause some damage. So there is some self-protection that the body does. And I do know that when I did do investigations, we did see some, very few children, but some children that had levels greater than 20 micrograms per deciliter. And I do recall looking at the drinking water in one of those situations, which it was negative. So that was good. Drinking water is only one of the ways children can be exposed to lead. So that's when I did do those investigations, we did look at other sources as well. But drinking water has over time, especially since the incident in Flint, Michigan in 2015, with the drinking water it is a significant component. Infants who consume mostly mixed formula can receive 40% to 60% of their exposure of lead from drinking water. So and a lot of times it's going to be more cost effective for a parent mixing formula to mix it with the drinking water. So and that was actually in the situation that I did have. The child was drinking formula, and that's why the water was checked. So, but like I said, it was negative actually in that particular home. I went in and I saw that the bottles were being put by the windows, on the windowsill. They were storing the bottles on the windowsill. They were touching the mini blind. And at that time, we were getting mini blinds from China, were being imported that had lead. And that looked to be kind of that seemed to be the major source in that one. And the particular family also were, I think, from India, and some of the makeup that the mothers wear can contain lead as well, but it really looked like the main source in that particular, which this was a very high lead level that the child had, seemed to have been from mini blinds. So that's just an example of different places that lead can be found in a child's environment other than the drinking water. So in children, even low levels of lead in the blood can result in behavior and learning problems, lower IQ and hyperactivity, slowed growth, hearing problems, anemia, in rare cases, ingestion of lead can cause seizures, coma, and even death. So this is why it's a little scary with children. Some of these things you wouldn't necessarily think of lead when a child has these. And then again, it's going to be hard to know, because historically a child could have been exposed to lead, but it may not be in their blood at the time that you're checking for that. Also with pregnant women, it's a huge concern because lead can accumulate in the body, like I said, stored in the bones along with calcium. During pregnancy, lead is released from the bones as maternal calcium and is used to help form the bones of the fetus. And it can be a big problem if the woman doesn't have enough dietary calcium. That's why the supplements that are given to pregnant women are so important. Lead can also cross the placental barrier, exposing the fetus to lead. This can result in serious effects to the mother and her developing fetus, including reduced growth of the fetus, premature birth. Lead can also be transmitted through breast milk, so that's why it's important to continue taking supplements while breastfeeding to help prevent it from getting into the milk. So I think I see, is there a question here? Oh, okay, no. So also lead can be harmful to adults. Exposure to lead can cause cardiovascular effects, increased blood pressure and incidence of hypertension, decreased kidney function, and also reproductive problems in both men and women. A lot of this, there can be fertility problems for males and as well. And a lot of that has led to OSHA regulations. There's a lead standard, and then there are standards and procedures for doing lead remediation. And that's based on these health effects that can occur to adults as well as children. Because adults can also be exposed to very high levels of lead in industrial situations, also gun ranges, and a variety of occupations. Okay. And then the question is asked, is it okay to shower in lead contaminated drinking water? And basically it should be safe because you're not drinking the water. It should be safe for you and your children to do that because the skin does not absorb the lead in the water. I would caution though, that if you have children that are bathing, like I know I showed in one of the earlier photos, if the children may be drinking the water, because that can, and in that case, you wouldn't want to have a very young child. You would have to take some precautions if you know that you do have lead in your drinking water for showering. But typically it wouldn't be a concern for showering, but for drinking, yes. Sources of lead in drinking water, and this gets you a little more if you're looking in your home, but also this would apply to commercial settings as well. Copper pipe with lead solder, and that would be solder made or installed before 1986. It's not that long ago, although in Florida we have a lot of more recent construction, so hopefully in many homes this isn't a concern. Faucets, the fixtures inside your home might contain lead. Galvanized pipe, and with this, lead particles can attach to the surface of galvanized pipe, and over time, the particles can enter your drinking water. I did attend a symposium recently where they were seeing this and talking about all these different layers of minerals that cake up on the inside of pipes and how all of a sudden it can be released and it can really heavily contaminate the drinking water if it contains lead. There's also goosenecks that attach pipes to other pipes from your lead service line to the main, and those can also contain some lead. And then the lead service line itself. And at this point, I think you can probably get with your municipality and find out where the lead service lines are, because that's been a lot of the more recent lead and copper rule has required that the municipality identify those. Here are some of the things you can do to reduce your exposure to lead. You can use cold water for drinking, cooking, and making baby formula. Hot water tends to draw the lead out if it is coming from from the materials in the lines and your fixtures. And just to note that boiling water is not going to remove the lead. It's important to regularly clean your faucet screen, known as the aerator, because you don't want, if particles were to be released, that if they were to kind of stay there, then they could contaminate the water on an ongoing basis. And then also consider using a water filter certified to remove lead, and know when it's time to replace the filter. That, I think they can't say enough of that, because a lot of times I see people put in filters and then they kind of leave them on indefinitely. And a lot of bacteria can accumulate in those filters. So you do want to make sure that you replace those when they're when they're due to be replaced, according to what the manufacturer is telling you to do. Also, before drinking, flush your pipes by running your tap, taking a shower, doing laundry, or a load of dishes. It's good to get the water running through the pipes. There's other, besides lead, there's other kinds of bacterias and films that can accumulate in pipes. So if you haven't been using the water for a while, it's always good to flush the pipes. And then if you want to know whether you have lead in your drinking water, you can have your water tested. It's probably the best way of knowing because, like I said, it may be that it's a fixture in your home that's causing the lead to enter the water. And the municipality isn't necessarily checking the water in your home. I do think that they are required to go into a certain number of homes and check the water for lead at this time, but they're not checking everybody's home, and that you can't check every line and every fixture in somebody's home. The only way you can do that is by having your water checked yourself. And sometimes I know there's been big projects in other states that for replacing the lead service lines, and that can be an issue because it's going to the home, and it may not be clear who's responsible for replacing that line. Okay, and if you want more information on this, like I said, all this information is from the EPA, and you can visit the website. So I guess if anybody has any questions. If there's any in the chat.
And feel free to put your questions in the chat. You can unmute yourself as well. In the meantime, I did have a question. So if you wanted your water tested, is that usually free, or how would you go about making that request to have your water tested?
I think it probably depends on where you're located, because there may be some programs for getting it tested free. You would want to make sure that it's a lab that has the credentials to do the lead testing, but probably it's going to be something that the homeowner would have to pay for. I do know there's a lot of companies that are offering filters that will give you a free test, but I'm not sure about trusting those. So you would want to be cautious about whether the lab that's testing that is credentialed to do so.
And do you know for like public spaces like schools, does their water get tested often?
Okay, that's a good question, and I did look into that because we're a university here, and a number of states have required that the drinking water be tested. It's in K through 12 and preschool. There are guidelines and standards that the EPA has published for doing so, and some states have made it the law to do so. In Florida, that is not the case. There has been a bill in going through the legislature for several years. There's been a lot of press with people wanting that to happen. But at this point in the state of Florida, we don't have that. Several states have, like Massachusetts has a big program. I think I was talking to somebody in Maryland that they've required it as well. And again, it's not universities, it's K through 12 and preschools, because they're focusing on children.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people think of it as the drinking water, the drinking fountains. They're checking drinking fountains mainly, but it's also for water that's used in cooking in the cafeterias,
Right.
and even they're including the lavatories, because somebody may drink out of a child might drink out of the lavatory brushing their teeth or something like that too. And in preschools, they do teeth brushing in some of them.
Mm-hmm.
Head Start programs, for example. But right now we don't have that in Florida. I know way back in the early 90s, I remember custodians in the schools telling me that they were testing the public schools in Palm Beach County, at least, for lead in the drinking fountains, and they were having to flush some of the drinking fountains. And I do know that a number of the public schools have tested, because I'm seeing it, that there's been articles about it, that they have found lead in some of the drinking fountains and that kind of thing. But at this point, I do think that if the state doesn't have a rule first, that probably it will be federal. And I think that because the federal government is really heavily looking at making it a federal law to start doing it. But again, it's focused more on K through 12 and preschools.
Right, right. Thank you. We do have a couple questions in the chat. First one here from Edward. Where can we find the Consumer Confidence Report? And were there any interesting things you saw when you looked at the Davy statistics?
Well, basically, what I did was I just Googled for it and I was able to find it because it depends on the municipality, and they did have it posted. The one in Davie, they did find some lead in a few places. Like I said, it depends on the numbers, and I can't, quote exactly where they found it or anything, but it wasn't like it was zero everywhere. They did. And because a lot of times we kind of think, oh, we're not going to find lead in paint, say in Florida, because the construction's so new. So I was a little surprised. And I did want to make sure that it wasn't just like a non-problem in Florida. Apparently it is an issue and can be an issue, because I did see they did find lead in some places, very low. I don't think it was a huge concern, but it wasn't zero everywhere.
Right, right. Tarek says, thank you for the info on the Consumer Confidence Report. He was just looking at the one for Pinellas County. Todd says, are there any comparisons between South Florida cities and other cities in the US?
I'm sure that there are. I'm not familiar with those comparisons, but the data is there. So I'm sure that somebody has studied that. So that would be something that would be good to investigate, I'm sure. But I do know, that there have been huge problems in other cities in the US, especially with Michigan. So and
I think there was a recent story, I don't remember, just a couple days ago, there was something with, a community where, everyone had to stop drinking the water. It was just a couple days ago. I can't, if anyone knows, please chime in, but I don't remember where it was. Benton, Michigan. Okay, thank you guys. Yeah. So I just heard it yesterday.
was that lead? Because I know
I think it was, yes. Yeah.
Because I know in Palm Beach County, there were some problems with some other contaminants and they couldn't drink the water. So it's good to know that we have our regulators that are monitoring all this and letting us know.
Absolutely. Yes. Todd also asked about condos and condo association law, as far as, I guess, checking, the water, the drinking water.
I'm not knowledgeable. The only standards and program that I'm aware of is the one for the K through 12 and the preschools. I'm not aware of anything for condos.
Right. And then he also asked, have we done any retrospective rehab for our NSU buildings that were, pre-1980s?
That I don't really know on that. I think we are looking at seeing if we have any historical records on that. So we are starting to do that, because in anticipation of a federal law that we'll be needing to look at least the K through 12 and the preschools. So
right.
I can't say that we don't have it. We may have it. So this is back in the 80s. It could be that did happen. And turnover and all that. So we want to look at that, though, and we do have plans to do that.
Right. Another question here: where can you go to find more information about filtration companies?
I would go to the EPA website and look for that, because you want to make sure that you're getting something that's going to work And I can see how there could be some concerns because there are so many, but I do think that they're certified. The filters themselves have certifications. So that would be the thing to look for on a filter is the certification that it has. Maybe look up the certification itself so that you know what it's been certified to do.
Right, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Feel free to unmute yourself as well or use the chat. Tarek says that he's definitely kept the filter on on his faucet without replacing it.
Yes.
Yeah, forget. Yeah.
Well, in my experience, I used to work in a dairy lab and we were doing bottled water. And our filters, the big carbon filters, put a lot of bacteria in the water that we had to then kill with ozone. So I get really concerned about filters growing bacteria, not lead necessarily. I
Mm-hmm.
would be concerned about lead, but bacteria themselves. So that's really the major reason to me that you would want to change those. But I'm sure that whatever's absorbing the lead also is only going to absorb so much lead that you would want to change it and make sure that it's able to do what it's supposed to do.
Mm-hmm. A comment here, super informative and terrifying. Yes, agreed. Awesome. Well, great. Yep, thank you for the informative presentation. I agree. Let me just switch screens here just to kind of end the session in case anyone else has any other questions. Let's see.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh, thank you, Daryl. We really appreciate your expertise and in kind of kicking off our web series. It's been great. I just want to close off here with a couple of notes. Next week is National and International Lead Poisoning Prevention Week, and you can find more information on our resources page. Also, the NSU Alvin Sherman Library is one of our partners in promoting the web series and virtual exhibit. If you live or work in Broward County, you can apply for Alvin Sherman Library card. It's free and you will have access to many resources and get notified about events like this one. Thank you all for attending and your questions. A special thank you to our guest speaker, Daryl Garsik, as well as the committee members who helped organize the event. Please visit lib.nova.edu/lead for more information on any of the events upcoming. And thank you all so much. Thank you, Daryl, again.